Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Are you somebody who's autistic or somebody who's not even autistic, looking for an agent to help you get into voice acting or acting? Well, my next guest works with those who are autistic, especially one-on-one. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage and let's learn more about them. See you there.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking, bottle up my intuition till it's popping.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Today I'm joined with Albert Bramante. Welcome to the show, Albert.
Great. Thank you, Reed, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for welcoming me to the show.
Not a problem. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Albert Bramante. I work with actors. I'm the CEO and owner of Bramante Artists. We are a full service talent agent based in New York City. And we work with actors for film, TV, theater, commercial, print, and voiceover. I also have a PhD in psychology, so I'm a part-time psychology professor. I've been teaching been doing both the agency and the teaching work for, about 22 years now. And, I'm really enjoy what I do. And, I love working with people, young people, actors, performers, coaches, influencers, and I just love working with different people, with working with mindset, working with psychology. Um, I wrote also a book last year called Rise of the Script, which deals with that, dealing with self-doubt, mastering self-sabotage for performing artists. Even though the book is geared towards performing artists, anybody and everyone can benefit from that who deals with issues of self-doubt and self-sabotage.
Now, have you dealt with anybody who is autistic?
I have worked with those that were like higher, like with Asperger's in a sense.
Mhm.
And I'm learning more about that. I mean, I've also, received a lot of training in psychology and child development, and working with people that are in what we call now neurodivergent in a sense, um, which categorizes under the ADHD, autism, Asperger's spectrum. So I'm not necessarily a provider, so I don't have entire knowledge. I wouldn't consider myself, by anywhere wouldn't even mean an expert in that specific area. Um, but I have worked, indirectly even with students that were autistic in the past.
Now, you say you wrote a book all that helps people with self-sabotage. Have you seen that with your students? Because
Yeah,
I know firsthand what it's like to self-sabotage yourself when you're not happy because you just want an out.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of times there's even sub sabotage to a point where you don't even realize you're doing it. So, and I've seen that both in the actors I work with as well as the students I work with, that it just be like a student who could be very bright, and capable, but maybe they don't realize that, or they don't study, for an important test. Instead of studying, they're, binging Netflix or going out and partying instead of, doing what they need to do, or they just stop coming to class and just give up, in a sense. But they're quite capable of doing that. Or an actor who just, doesn't go on auditions anymore, or, doesn't prepare as he or she should before an audition. So that's how self-sabotage looks like,
Now,
in my realm.
do you see more of that in those of your students and actors who are on the spectrum as of those who are off?
I would say more off. I think on, it might be more processing differently. I think usually it's off the spectrum. I've seen, because I've seen, some of my better students that like the ones that were on the spectrum were really gifted in a sense. So I think they just need to be taught, or need to be worked with in a different way. They may not learn the traditional way.
Now, how do you help those students who are autistic, I mean, especially like besides self-sabotaging, how do you help them in terms of acting and psychology? Do you use your psychology when you are working with them?
A little bit, I might explain things a little bit more. I might try to use different modalities. Sometimes people more audio, hearing more, maybe kinesthetic. Um, so it really depends on altering my approach. It's the whole thing of like one size fits all doesn't apply here when it comes to education. And then I might even employ like somebody who is an expert in autism education or working with people on the spectrum. Like, what should I do here if I really am stumped? Because I believe in that. Like I said, I'm nowhere near an expert. I know my limitations to a point where I would consult an expert, who would be better equipped to help. But typically, I would say just coming up with different ways and being very patient. Yeah, I think is important. Even if that might mean explaining it in different ways or different things over time. That
When dealing with students, I know, do you deal with those who are on the spectrum different than who are off the spectrum? Do you use a different technique when you're working with them?
I would say more patience and understanding. If they're on the spectrum, but I try not. My whole thing is even on empowerment is try not to dwell on the fact that they're on the spectrum. I because I try to work with them as if they aren't. Like as if that they're equal. So this way I don't feel ostracized or like zeroed in or self conscious. So, and then again, that might just mean explaining things a different way. Maybe giving extra time with assignments or not, or breaking things down so they don't feel overstimulated, or overwhelmed.
Now, when you deal with these students, what do you do to help them work with their time? I mean, you give them extra time, you give them patience. Where do you see them struggle the most?
Maybe getting overwhelmed, um, distractibility sometimes, getting like so maybe instead of I might work with them on the side because usually when they are on the spectrum they're registered at least in the colleges with the Office of Disability or Accessibility, so they have a legitimate. And so at that point I order privately with them and say, look, okay, we're going to do one thing at a time, rather than instead of having like, because sometimes I might have 2 or 3 assignments during a week. Okay, you're only going to do one a week, and then when you're finished with that one you're going to work on this. And then I would say just being very patient and acknowledging where they're coming, where they're coming from, and just reinforcing, like they completed the assignment. Because just because they're on the spectrum does not mean they're capable. And some of them are very bright, and some of them are even above average than other students when it comes to intellectual capacity or being able to process information.
Now, when you have an actor come to you, do you figure out if they're on the spectrum? Do they tell you?
They usually tell me because again, I'm not a specialist, so I'm not equipped to diagnose, and I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. That's not my scope. So I wouldn't feel comfortable to say to someone, "I think you are," or "I feel you are." So usually they'll come to me, and like I said, usually they might say, on the spectrum, or they might say I'm a neurodivergent artist. Um, and for the most part, again, it's I haven't found anything out of the ordinary, as far as like special techniques to work with them. I just feel like being very patient. So kind of like how I work with every artist, in a sense. Um, and again, just trying to overwhelm the thing. And, maybe I'll coach them more, a little bit more on like acting technique, if that's the case, like before auditions, like where I'll say, I'll help you either run lines or I'll work with you, behind the scenes in any way possible. Um, and be just being very patient and not overwhelming, like not to overwhelm.
Now, when you're dealing with when your students, do you find that the neurodivergent ones are a lot more passionate about what they're doing?
Sometimes, yes, um, absolutely, and that's great. That even helps me in the class, because that really boosts morale in the classroom because it really um, reinforces what they learn. And I think well, I'll ask them a lot. What do you think? What are your thoughts? So I incorporate them in the classroom, and just be very patient because again, some of them can also be very good communicators too.
Now, do you see a difference in the in those students who want to regular act to those who want to voice act?
Um, I think maybe those that with voice acting might be a little bit more catered towards those that are on the spectrum because again, they don't have to worry about being on camera. There's that less of that anxiety, less of that stimulation. Because with voice acting, you can just again be anywhere around the house as long as you have a good microphone and a good setup. You could pretty much do it anywhere. And again, sometimes that helps even with animation too, because of just really being able to get into character, and sometimes that helps too. Um, being on the spectrum can help even with the creativity and just being able to go into character. Um, so yeah, I mean, it really depends, really on the actor and what their true goals or intentions are.
Now, let me ask you, when you have a student who is neurodivergent, and a majority of them we know are shy, what techniques do you use to like coerce them to like open up and express themselves and try
First, I
to,
would I would try to do it privately. I wouldn't call them out. I don't think that's a proper thing to do. Is to call them out in the middle because that would can compound their anxiety, and that's one thing I'm trying want to avoid and minimize. So I might say so and so. What do you think? I'd love to hear what you have to say, and I think we can all benefit from what you have to say. Um, Now I teach a lot now on Zoom, so maybe putting it in the chat if you're not comfortable speaking, maybe putting it in the chat, maybe or even not having your camera or having your camera off and speaking. So this way you don't have everything in front. So those are some ways, but I would just gently, when my experience is found is once they're comfortable, I have no, there's no really much coaxing that's needed after that.
now, what advice do you have for anyone who wants to become either a voice actor or a regular actor, and they are neurodivergent?
Well, I would say first say welcome. There's a place for you all. I would say try to find, because every actor needs training. Try to find a training program that's right for you. Ask around. Um, there are a lot of, I believe that there's, Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups of, you know, not only for just actors, but even those on neurodivergent. To look for those resources and community, even form a community, even, and just, look at for the right, acting, trainers that cater to that. Because for any actor, especially if I'm going to be working with them at some point, they need training, technique wise. So I would say definitely that would be the first thing to find a program that's you're comfortable that aligns with you and aligns with what you're going for, and then go from there. The important thing is take things slowly and be gentle, with yourself in a sense.
Now, when you're dealing with your students, you
Hmm.
use your psychology with them. Has it helped you more because you're able to kind of get into a mindset of what they're feeling, how they're feeling it, and be able to relate to them?
Yeah, I mean, purely, I would just, I think even simply by asking. I don't make assumptions on how they're feeling or anybody's feeling unless I don't know, unless I ask.
Mhm.
So I don't ever want to assume how somebody's feeling. I like to ask, and then go from there. I would base, whatever my approach would be, I tailor to that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about you now. Why did you want to get into psychology, and how did you go from psychology to working with actors?
Sure. Well, I always wanted to. I was always interested in mine. I was, always a bookworm or a book nerd. Growing up, so I was always into books, reading. My I kind of considered the odd one in my family because everybody in my family was into sports and athletics and football and baseball and all that. I was into books, and so but what I was always interested in the human mind, the brain, the mind, and so I started reading some books myself. A lot of books in the mind and psychology when I was in high school. And then I was also interested a little bit into acting, not much enough to be an actor myself, but I was in a drama club in high school, and then in college, my undergrad, I took some acting classes as electives, and I really enjoyed it. But I didn't. I love being around actors, so I received my master's, and then I started. When I was working, even working outside of acting, I was working in social services when I first started. And I was meeting a lot of actors, but I found myself being very drawn to their energy, to their, psyche in a sense. And I really felt at home and I wanted to find a way to support them. And then I started recommending for jobs and they were booking jobs. And I figured, why not do this as for a living and become an agent? So 2004, I started, my company, my first company, um, and I was teaching psychology at the same time too because I had my master's. And so I said, I might as well go all the way now. I have my master's, so let me go for my PhD. And so I started doing that. I did an online program, Walden University, and it took me a little bit longer because I was also teaching. I was also running my company, and that's how I started becoming like mixing of the both worlds. Psychology, education, and acting in a sense. Um, and then, after I received my dissertation PhD, I was still teaching, still running the agency. I decided, 2 years ago to write a book, my first book, and that's what led me here. I published a book last year, so um, I kind and I always had sort of problem more so with actors with self-sabotage. And I couldn't figure that out because verbally they were telling me they want to act, but their behaviors were not telling me that story. They were, like I said, missing auditions or being late to auditions and, but yet at the same time telling me how much they wanted to work. So I couldn't figure that out what was going on. And so that's why I did my doctoral dissertation on and then, years later decided to turn that into a book.
Talk a little bit about that. How do
Mm-hmm.
you deal with an actor, neurodivergent or neurotypical, who is self-sabotaging? How do you get it to the point where you say to them, listen, I know you want to do what you want to do. I know you love acting, but I see all the signs that you are not happy. You're
Mm-hmm.
sabotaging yourself. How do you tell them that to make them see it so they see it themselves?
Well, I would, gently point it out to them, like, well, you say this, but yet these past couple of appointments you haven't went to or you were late to. What's going on? Because there could be a whole host of issues too. There could be stuff going on in their personal life that I might not know of. Because some of the actors some actors I know really well. Others I just kind of work with them professionally, and that's it. So I got to figure out first of all what's going on. The second thing is, and I talk about this in my book, a lot of it has to do with fear, with self-sabotage. So it could be, fear of failure, fear of success. And so we talk through it, and say, okay, what, try to figure out what's going on there first. And it may take a while, but I think just understanding the motivation behind it, because a lot of times it could be just a misguided way of self protection. And so working with the self-protective mode maybe just needs to be redirected in another way so that they are being successful, but still, protecting themselves.
Would you say that a lot of that fear of protection is because they see failure, they're afraid that they're not going to get the call, they're not going to get the job they want. And how do you
Right.
deal with that? Because you and I both know a fear of rejection is tough. It hits you.
Yeah. Well, I kind of reframe it a bit. So, where first of all, look at there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So try to reframe it where it's like, okay, what can you learn from this? So let's say you do you do go on that interview, that audition, and you make mistakes. So, okay, what can you learn from that? And what feedback does that give you? So there's really no such thing as failure, only feedback. So what can you learn from that? And also not to take it personally. I mean, it's difficult to do that, not to take it personally. But it's only, there's so many amount of actors and only one person can get the role. So, and if you didn't get the role, you reframe it like it just didn't go your way this time. It just didn't happen to go in your direction. However, it's not to do with you. Because as an actor you could really do a very good audition, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get the role automatically. There's so many other factors. It could be an inch too tall, an inch too short, the wrong eye color that they're looking for, stuff that's not in your control. So reframing that as, look, it's not rejection, it's not personal. And if you have made mistakes in the past, look at them as feedback and learning experience and opportunities.
I know that fear of rejection well. I mean, not just in the social life, but
Hmm.
I had auditioned twice for Love on the Spectrum.
Hmm.
And it wasn't a normal Zoom, it wasn't a normal interview. It was more, let's just get to know you and see who you are.
Yeah.
And they don't tell you, they won't tell you if you
Yeah,
got it.
that you rarely get feedback. I mean, sometimes they're nice enough, and they'll say, like they'll email me as an agent saying, thank them for auditioning. It's just not going to go in their direction right moment. But you don't really get that. That's minor. That's only rare occasions. Um, but I would just encourage them. Okay, so if this didn't go your way, so what are you doing for the next audition? Let's keep working at that, because it is really, at some point a numbers game too. So you have to, the important thing is just to keep continuing and keep continuing. And again, if there's things that are going wrong in the auditions, what can you do to make it better? What changes can you make? What improvements can you make?
I mean, that's one of the hardest things is, especially when you're neurotypical, is when you go for something, either a job interview or even a acting interview, it's, am I good enough? Am I what they have? Am I what they're looking for? And how do you get it through to your students, for your actors even, on both sides who are either neither or nor, that you can't overthink anything going into the interview?
Yeah, well, that's the key thing. Like, for actors, I would say, when you go on an acting interview, an audition, reframe that as looking like you're performing for 2 minutes. You're getting a chance to showcase yourself for 2 minutes and have fun while you're doing that. And then let it, don't overthink it. Just let it go when it's over. Because if anything, you were able to have the opportunity to show 2 minutes, that you were having fun in
Mhm.
doing that. And therefore there's no stakes, because now if you're just having fun, and then when it's over, just let it go. Now focus on the next opportunity. And the same thing goes even for interviews. Like, look, you're getting to share your expertise with somebody. That should be, you've made it thus far, because, in order to get that interview or that audition, you already had to be weeded out already by so many other people. that apply. Because a lot of people who apply will not get an interview, both in the acting and the real world setting. So you've already made that, that cut. So that's something great. It's just now let's just keep going, because it's not a matter of if you'll be successful, it's when. When will that, you land that job? So reframing it now that from the word if to when,
And
and
that's
just
the
stay determined. And I give examples that even actors that aren't, neurotypical, that are everyday actors, sometimes they have to go on 200 or 300 auditions before they land a role. So I would, just encourage that. I look, this is this person had to, go on 200 or 300 auditions before they land a role, their first role. So it's, just keep going is the key.
I think that's one of the biggest things that people need to realize is it's the same with an interview, no matter if it's acting or a job, is it's the art of turning a negative into a positive.
Yes.
It's all about how can you, when they ask you, okay, how can you turn this experience you've had, how did you make it a positive one? And it's the same,
Absolutely.
and it's the same thing with your answer. It's like, tell me what is your weakest, what is your, what is it? What's your weakest strength? Working overtime. And then you got to learn to know how to take that and spin it into a positive.
Yes.
So they see it like, oh, he doesn't see working overtime as a bad thing, but he uses it to his advantage.
Right. Yeah. Well, working overtime, well, that means you're really dedicated. That's amazing, that you're really dedicated at your job. And you want to see things through, and that's a great thing. And then, if overtime is getting them and saying, well, is there another way? Maybe, is there a way you can do that same thing you're working on now tomorrow, the next time you work in? And then this way you could start to, you know, take over. But I think reframing that as overtime as being negative, but no, you're just simply dedicated to your job. That's a great thing.
Or the other thing is, what is your weakest strength? Saying no.
Yeah,
Because
that's
then
another thing, too. I know you care about people, but and a lot of people fear saying no because they're afraid of disappointing, or
yes.
getting, the other person upset. And to reframe that, be like, look, well, if you're asking for overtime, well, that's outside of your work schedule and your work duties. So you're not, by saying no, you're saying yes to yourself, and standing up for yourself, which ultimately, if the employer really has your best interest at heart, will understand that, and will respect you. And I often found that when people stand up for themselves and are more assertive, they get more respect. So it actually can actually help you by, saying no, in a respectful way, of course, being respectful, but at the same time, you know, starting to take control of your time and your schedule.
Now, when you have neurodivergence coming to you, do they know where they want to go in the acting world, if it's voice or if it's regular, or do
A
you
lot
kind of
of times
guide them?
they know, like they reach out to me, they'll say that either they're a voice actor or on camera. And it's really not my place to tell somebody, I'll go, I think you should go into voice. I may suggest as an addition, like, oh, like somebody will have a really good expressive voice, or they can do different, vocal tones, and I might say, you know what, you should go into voice, look into voice acting as well. Um, but I really don't leave that. I leave that decision up to the actor to decide whether they want to pursue something over the other.
Now, have you had someone who's neurodivergent try one and realize that they're better off at the other?
Yeah, I've had them say that. Look, I think I'm better off at voice acting. Great. Okay, let's work on that then, and let's not focus on camera.
Now, do you now you said you do give them one-on-ones.
Hmm.
What kind of help do you give them? What kind of tutelage do you give them to help prompt them for like a voice acting interview or an actual interview? What kind of guidance do you help them with?
Well, I would, really encourage them to first of all be themselves, um, and not to, try to be someone they're not, or, um, and I would really just encourage them, even though it's an interview, be, almost as if you're talking to a friend. Don't be, I try to normalize the other person so that they're not intimidated by that, or they don't get easily overwhelmed by the power dynamic or the perceived power dynamic of like this person's more powerful, which will cause anxiety, when anybody, is perceived to be more powerful. Um, and then, when it comes to actual audition prepping, it's just like just having fun with the character. And so again, prepping what I said before, you're getting a chance to perform. That's the best part.
People don't realize it when you look at shows like The Voice or even America's Got Talent. When they say you got 2 minutes, that's their interview.
Yeah,
But what people don't realize beyond that is it takes countless interviews before you get to them.
right. Exactly. Because what you're seeing again is a condensed version of that. Most of the people who audition for The Voice or American Idol, you don't see them because they don't make it to that round, in front of the judges. It's only, the top, a few points, for like a lot of times, some of like I'm not a I'm a little conflicted because I feel like with reality shows they do give a chance, but I also feel like they exploit and embarrass and humiliate, and
Yeah,
that I'm
that's
not
the
really too crazy
call.
about that, because it's all about sensationalism and ratings and
Yeah.
to get people to talk. So I'm not a big fan of that. And but yeah, I would explain that look, it takes time. They go through many different cuts, and I've had clients who've auditioned for those shows. They never made it, but they said sometimes they would go through 3 or 4 or 5 rounds and then would get cut, but they would never make it to the TV portion of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like with America's Got Talent, you see all these people auditioning, but what you don't realize is they're just showing you all these people coming, but they're not showing you that
Mhm.
little, they're only showing you the people that made it to the finals.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with a client who's just come from an audition and they were told, "I'm sorry, you haven't made it," and they know the feeling of, "Hey, it's not personal, but it still hits them hard." I mean, especially for somebody who's neurodivergent, it hits you really hard, and you just feel like to crawl back in your shell. How do you deal with that? Because it's a tough thing to take.
Well, I think the first thing is is really empathy, because I can understand that. It is a blow. But then try to reframe that like this is not about you personally. First of all, I would say, you did that, you put yourself out there. It's a great thing. You know, congratulations, and it didn't sometimes it feel in your favor. And also sometimes I would encourage an actor not to overthink because I've had occasions, not that hasn't happened that often, where an actor would call me after the audition and say, "I think it went really bad," and was really upset, and then I wound up getting the call the next day that they booked the job. So it really, a lot of times, your perception of how it went might not be exactly how it went. So really, I would say, okay, let's talk about it. Why do you think it didn't go so well? And very, why didn't you get the job? Well, okay, but only one person could, and you still put yourself out there, and you already, outshined a lot of the competition who didn't get even an audition, who applied. So, and I would just say, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Um, and so the important thing is just encouraging not to give up and not to look at this as a failure.
I mean, I think that's the biggest part is getting them out of their heads that they're a failure because once you get them into that stage of thinking, hey, it's not you, it's
Hmm.
it's what they're looking for.
Exactly. It's not about you. It just, that's not what they're looking for right now.
I mean, like I was saying, when I auditioned for Love on the Spectrum, I was told by somebody that what they were really looking for at that point, they're not going to tell you, but they were looking for more females than males.
Right. And so that actually could be good feedback for you to know, well, I'm not going to dwell on that. Okay, that's not what, I have no control over what they're looking for. All I can do is, okay, the next opportunity to show comes, but you go submit another tape, go do another audition, or a similar thing comes up, do that, keep doing it. The important thing is not to give up and not to look at that as something against you, because it's not.
No, it's not. I mean, that's the biggest thing I think, no matter how you look at it in any kind of interview, whether it's television, movies, job, it's not you, it's what they're looking for in the applicant, in the person they want to fill that role.
100% yes.
Now, how do you tell someone if they come to you and they go, should I change my appearance? Should I change the way I look to appease them to get that role? Do you tell them, no, don't
Of
change,
course
be
not.
yourself?
Absolutely. Be yourself, because that's what really is all about. You know, don't please other. I mean, that's getting at it again. What we were saying just about a few minutes earlier, the people pleasing trap.
Mhm.
No, you're just not right for this particular role, for this particular role, for this particular project. So no, absolutely not. Unless you want to just change overall for yourself, okay. But I wouldn't do it just for a particular role or particular person. If you were just now, sometimes an act, and especially an actress, might want to change their hair color. Well, if you want to do that just for your personal, great, but not for a specific role. I would advise against that. If she was, but if she want, then fine. Let's try, this different hair color if that's what you want to do, but not out of pressure. Doing it because you want to do it as a choice if you want to change, not because you're trying to please somebody else.
I think that's the biggest problem is when you're going for a role, you don't know exactly what they're looking for in a person. You don't know what they want in the role. And even I guarantee you the most professional actors, the biggest actors will go for a role and they'll tell them, I'm sorry, you're not qualified for this role. Or they
Right.
just won't get the call back.
Yeah, or that you're just not right for it. I don't really. I mean, if they're going to tell you to a point you're not qualified, I mean, and that might be a strong word to say, but it might just be like you're just not right for this role, or we're looking for somebody again who's another gender or and taller, older. And again, that's not in your control. And that's why it's a mentality of like, okay, next.
Now, do you help your actors either on or off the spectrum find that role that they're looking for? Do you tell them like, oh, if they go to you, I'm like, I'm interested in applying for this role. Do you tell them, I don't think that's right for you? It's not.
Occasionally, but I mean, I occasionally I might, say like, well, maybe this is not the right age range for you, or this is not the right type of character. Let's look for this type of roles for you. I would never, and again, most of the actors that even, on the spectrum and off still have a good sense of who they are, their type wise. So most of the time, their interests are in line.
If you had an actor come to you and just say, come back from a thing and say, like from after an audition, they got it and they realize, oh crap, this is complete shit.
Hmm. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes that can happen, you know. And then I would kind of say, whether when they mean if they say the word shit, are they talking about the writing? Are they talking about their performance? If they're talking about the writing, well, then I would say maybe this is not the type of project you want to be involved in or associated with. If it's that their performance, I would say, okay, let's talk about it. Why do you think it happened like this? Why do you think it was like that? And again, sometimes we're our own worst critics, so sometimes we're a little hard on ourselves when when we thought we made mistakes and it turns out we haven't, or the other person didn't pick that up.
I mean, that's a tough call. I mean, when you're an actor, to really know if what you're going for is going to be right, going to be that right fit for you, and then to realize after you've gone through everything, to realize that it doesn't suit you, it doesn't fit your character, it doesn't fit your personality, and then you have to sit there and grit and bear it through it until you're done.
Right. Yeah. So, and again, that's part of, understanding yourself and understanding what you want to do and what you don't want to do. I don't advise an actor to do something that they're morally opposed to or they're not comfortable with, or that they really don't want to do, because that's unhelping. That's actually going to be hurting, if you do something or stick to something that you don't want to do.
Do you have a specific age range you work with?
No, all ages. I have people that I work with that are kids, and I have people that I work with that are in their 70s and 80s. So,
Now, when you have an actor come to you, what kind of issues do they come to you with?
well, most of the time it's trying to find work. That's primarily what I do as an agent.
Hmm.
But aside from that, sometimes, it could be questioning why they're not getting, bookings, why they're not getting enough auditions. So I may help them with their marketing materials a little bit more. But I'd say primarily the reason why they come to me is to find acting work.
Now, do you accept anybody, or do you have your limitations of who you will take and who you won't take?
Yeah, I you have to have training, at least some sort of training in acting beforehand, and some sort of experience. So, um, like somebody who just wakes up and wants to be an actor, not for me, not yet. They need to go through some training and have some sort of experience already. And also, one of the things, especially being an agent when I represent actors, I don't want to have too many of the same type. So, if somebody's like, blonde, female in their 20s, I'm not going to have 50 blonde females in their 20s. I may only take a small handful of that at a time, because I don't want to have too much competing in the agency. It's not going to help me. I'm not going to be of service.
Yeah. And finally, where can people find out more about you and even get a hold of you if they are?
Sure. Well, I'll put it in the chat here, but you can follow me on Instagram of Dr. Albert Bramante. Um, you can also go to my agency website, and if you're looking to connect, I'll put those all in the chat. Yeah, and feel free to DM me on Instagram or reach out to me. I'll be happy to chat.
And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reed Miles. That was Dr. DiMonte, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Reed.